I feel like they should make a drinking game out of our YouTube video today of every time I cringe, you have to take a drink because it's me holding back a joke about younger being better.
Yeah, I can't wait
probably
for
gonna
all
have
the
to
editing I'm going to have to do.
possibly cut some stuff out here.
Apologies in advance.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Jake from Gold Eagle.
And tonight, as promised, we are talking about age statements and how, in some cases, they're totally overrated.
No.
Overrated or just don't matter as much as a lot of people think?
I think that's the better description.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
And I think especially recently, we've been seeing a lot of lower age stated or non-age stated whiskeys that have actually, one, have been pretty expensive, but also have pulled through and have tasted great as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think, a few episodes ago, we were talking about what the hell was that episode? Anyway, we got on the topic.
We're just starting off with a bang.
The tater bottles.
We were in taters, and then just when Dan was out 2 weeks ago, we were talking about age statements a little bit and how a lot of people are.
Oh yeah, it's kind of how we got the idea to do this.
Yeah, a lot of people are like outright dismissing bottles if they don't have an age statement or they perceive it as being too young. So, we wanted to bring this up because it is kind of an important topic. And I think age statements have their place, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything in terms of how good the whiskey tastes or the quality of the whiskey.
100%.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to our master distiller today about it a little bit, and he started laughing because, you know what, I'm going to say the name of the store because I'm going to talk shit about it, kind of. He was at a Binny's, and somebody there in the aisles that was a customer said that they won't drink a bourbon if it's 4 years or younger. And that's the clientele they get at Binny's, apparently, is people just shutting off a whole section of the liquor store because they don't think it's old enough. We wouldn't have that at Gold Eagle.
Occasionally we get it too. 4 years is pretty extreme though.
Yeah.
But we get it. We get it all the time too. You get someone that comes through the aisle and they need to know the age. They want to know the age, and they just have a number in their head and automatically assume if it's younger than that number, they don't want any part of it. And I think a lot of that kind of originates with Scotch, because with Scotch, age statements were kind of the only thing to measure the quality of a Scotch, especially before all this technology with using different types of oak, different types of barrels, different finishing techniques to kind of speed up the aging process a little bit, even like different temperature controlled situations. I think Old Forester is a great example for this podcast because all their whiskey is about 4 to 6 years old. And I think if you put up their standard 4 to 6 year stuff against their prized possession birthday bourbon, you can find a lot of better flavors. Not necessarily saying they're 100% better than like birthday bourbon, but their standard core lineup has a lot of qualities that birthday bourbon lacks. So I think there's a lot of examples why younger whiskey, particularly with American whiskey, is better. And I think Scotch just traditionally has kind of put out, better, more expensive whiskeys with older age statements. And just most people just kind of associate, older age means better. And I think a lot of that started with the Scotch category.
Yeah, and a lot of the reason why Scotch is tend to be so old is because of the climate in Scotland,
Right.
which is very like flat in terms of temperature fluctuation year round. So you're not getting much wood interaction in the barrel. And to really extract those like oak notes out of the bourbon or get like the sherry, if they're using a sherry finish, it's got to sit in those barrels for a long time. Where in most of the United States, especially like Kentucky or some of the other like southern or western states that are distilling a lot, you get way faster aging, or like perceived aging, I guess, because you're talking about massive temperature fluctuations either throughout the year or even day to day. I was at Delbach in Tucson, and they said every day they have like a 40-degree temperature swing. So their single malt ages in like 18 to 24 months because otherwise it's just like undrinkable. It
Too
just gets
oaky.
way too oaky, and they actually start losing so much whiskey to the angel share that it's like not worth it to age it longer than 2 years. And so like
Yeah,
it's heavily dependent on climate, and I
absolutely.
mean, even Old Elk, I think, is at a higher elevation, and they see crazy differences between like when they were importing stuff from MGP. Like, I think I can't remember exactly what, but they said they lost like huge percentages of barrels that they brought from Indiana, like way quicker than they would have in Indiana, just because of the elevation and the climate in northern Colorado.
Yeah, I was gonna say even in like the northern part of the U.S., it gets a lot hotter than the hottest months in Scotland. So
Mm-hmm.
over there, it's just pretty one dimensional the whole entire life of the whiskey. So there's a lot less evaporation. But yeah, I mean, I've noticed a lot lately. Like there's a lot of characters in younger whiskeys that kind of pull through. Usually get a lot of brighter fruits. Especially when it comes to blends. Uh, and I've heard from a lot of blenders too that younger whiskey really make or breaks the blend if you pick the right young whiskey to, layer in there with the older oakier stuff.
Mm-hmm. I
Mm-hmm.
think another thing that leads to people looking for older stuff too and putting a floor of 4 or 6 years in is I think a lot of people start understanding bottled and bond, and they think that, okay, 4 years is the middle for bottled and bond, and that has to be better than the same thing that's not 4 years. Which back in the early 1900s, bib was a very important thing because it meant it was drinkable whiskey and not shit. Where we don't have that anymore. So 100 proof 3 year versus 100 proof 4 year bottled and bond, can be just as good at 3 years or less than a 4 year. I think it's just people see that and they think that just because it's bottled and bond means it's going to be better than the original stuff because it might have a little bit of age, but it's basically 4 years aged and 100 proof and a couple small things that like the one distillation, one season, things like that, which doesn't necessarily make too big a difference one way or the other. You just know you're getting the same crop. So
Yeah, the bottled and bond is a good point. I think that's kind of become like a universal standard for like quality. Because that was the intent of the Bottled and Bond Act, so it
right.
makes sense. But we're in a time now where the there's not as much issues with people putting like foreign things into the whiskey and opening it up to those kinds of issues that were pretty prevalent in the late 1800s.
Well, there's an FDA now. There wasn't an FDA back then,
Right.
so that's why you had to have the Bottled and Bond Act. But FDA regulates all this stuff anyways. So,
Right.
Jake, do you think people when they go to the store are looking for a specific flavor profile when they want stuff that's not below a certain age limit, or what do you think that they're looking for?
I mean, I think ultimately people are looking for a flavor profile, right? Like a flavor that they like. But I do think probably half of those people associate a certain flavor with a certain age.
Mhm.
When I don't think that that's necessarily the case every time. You know, maybe they had like a 8 year or a 9 year bourbon that they really like, and they just get in their head like, I need some age on my bourbon for me to enjoy it.
Mhm.
Um, Without exploring other options. But we're like, especially with blends, you know, we've in the last couple episodes we've talked a lot about how blending is more respected now than it ever was. And when you pick up a whiskey that doesn't have an age statement, and it's, you know, like 2XO for a good example, nobody knows the age that he's putting in there, but people just kind of trust it. And you got to think that there is some younger whiskey in there blended with some old aged whiskey, because there is a lot of fruit and a lot of liveliness on that bottle. But the price point kind of tells you that it's layered in, and especially with the oakiness that it carries, that there's some older stuff to kind of make it a little more complex and, you know, flavorful.
Yeah, and even with brands that are more transparent, like Bardstown, where they actually give you
Mm-hmm.
the blending proportions. You know, like on the um, Discovery, or sorry, the
That's kind of what I
Fusion.
was gonna say. Just to come in really quick, like I don't think you should put an age statement on a blend unless you are putting the entire mash and age, just like how Bardstown Bourbon Company does.
Mhm.
Yeah, like this is Fusion Series number 7, and 54% is a 3-year whiskey, and then another 10% is another 3-year whiskey. So, you know, 64% of this is 3-year whiskey. And I
What's
think
the rest of the blend?
uh another 6% is a 3-year whiskey. So it's what, 70%, and 20% 12-year, 10% 12-year. So 70%
I
3-year,
mean,
30% 12-year. So
Good math
that's
there. Good save
yeah,
on the
great
math.
job, but
yeah,
that's very interesting. Kind of like 12 years, almost considered, you know, extreme aging for bourbon. A lot of people say like 10 to, you know, 12 is the sweet spot. And then 3 year would kind of be considered extremely young for a
yeah,
bourbon.
Yeah.
But I bet you that bottle tastes pretty good.
yeah.
Well,
And if
and
they
the
were to
funny thing
put,
is, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if they would have put age 3 years right on the front, nobody would buy it,
Right.
Right.
you know, even though it is technically a 3 year bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because those big distilleries that have some of that 10, 12, 15, 18 older age stuff, when you go to their distilleries, all of the things that they age for a long time are down in the bottom of their big warehouses where there's the least temperature change because they're not, they know they're going to leave it for a while, but they don't want it going in and out of that oak so quick, nonstop, year after year after year, because they know it's going to destroy the flavor profile after a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like just thinking of Sazerac, they always benchmark. They always say it's up on the top floor, and they age that around 4 to 6 years, I believe, is the normal benchmark. But it was just a year or two ago that one of the benchmark full proofs had a big award winner at one of the big festivals, and it's like that's what Buffalo Trace considers their cheap stuff that they age as quick as they can up high, and it beats some of the stuff that's aged slowly down low.
Yeah. Well, that's to Jake's point, you know, like Old Forester and I think Woodford and several others all use climate controlled warehouses so that they don't over oak anything, you know,
Mm-hmm.
specifically. Because they're not trying to get that like super oaky profile. They're trying to keep some of those younger, fruitier kind of notes in the whiskey.
Yeah, it's and one thing we talk about, or talked to our master distiller about at work with was usually in the first 3 or 4 years you get the majority of the notes that you want to get out of the barrel as a distiller. You're going to get more complexity stuff after 4 years. It's going to continue to age, but you're going to get farther and farther away from the initial spirit flavor in the whiskey. and it's going to start getting oakier and oakier and oakier. And even like I know, Jake, you and I have talked about it ourselves before. When you read the tasting notes for something like Pappy Van Winkle 23, it sounds difficult to taste.
Yeah.
It's like at a certain point, it goes way too far, but as it gets older and older and older, you're going to get more of the mellowed out spirit, more of the barrel. And if you're just going for barrel notes, find a whiskey that's not going to have, I'm trying to think of a good example here, but just if you're just looking for oak, then go with double oak products. Like don't go for other things. If that's the flavor profile you're looking for, stay there.
Yeah. You're only making it harder on yourself if you're looking for a Pappy 23 just for the oak flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like one of the reasons why we kind of had brought this up, I think it was in the blending episode, was that you said, you had seen an uptick in people brushing things off because it wasn't old enough. I think we talked about how doing the blind tastings has kind of opened up some people's eyes to the fact that you can find really good whiskeys without an age statement at all, or that are on the younger side. So like, I don't know if you want to talk about that, because like your experience with blind tastings is probably unparalleled.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, and I was gonna say this is the perfect time for Dan to get excited because we can plug Gold Eagle and Whiskey Acres at the same time. in the last blind tasting, we had our single barrel from Whiskey Acres, which I'm pretty sure is barely a 5-year, or like just over a 5-year, just over right 5.
Around,
yeah, right around 5 years. It took down Booker's, which minimum age is 7-year, but you got they're blending like 7 to 12-year, maybe older bourbon in there, and it's one of the most sought after bottles. And then a young local whiskey took it down in our blind tasting. So I think that's like a prime example of why age doesn't really mean better,
Mm-hmm. You got to find that sweet spot in a distillery of where you're still getting the spirit flavor you want out of it without getting too oaky. Now, like we'll have our first ever 7-year go out this summer, which I think we'll hopefully get a preview of on the show. And it tastes it's starting to taste a lot different than our normal 4-year or 5-year bib. You're starting to get a majorly different profile. It's really good. I think you guys will be really impressed with it. It's just as it's getting older, it's losing some of the complexity, but it's getting more of that vanilla marshmallow oak. I think it's going to be a massive crowd pleaser because of that, but it gets a little bit farther away from the fruity notes of some of the stuff that we put out day after day on the shelf. And it's funny because even our master distiller prefers the younger stuff, and the barrel picks he does for the visitor center are usually younger than a lot of the stuff we're putting out in our blends. But that's just his flavor profile that he likes.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good place to transition into. When do we think that age statements are relevant?
I think there's a time and place, and I think it is also a good time to say, like, we're not necessarily saying that younger is better, but there's a time and a place for an age statement. And the biggest message, I guess, with this podcast is don't be afraid of something just because it doesn't have that 8, 10-year, 12-year age statement, because it'd be very fun to compare that 7-year Whiskey Acres bottle that's coming out to like a 4 or 5-year pick, just to kind of pick out the differences. Because you'll probably get less like fruity flavors, maybe a little less sweetness, but you'll for sure get a lot more oak, maybe a little more, like deeper caramel flavors on that older bottle. So I don't know. I think it's just kind of something to experiment with and another weapon to add to like the tasting arsenal. Trying different age statements out, but I think it's just for sure something that you shouldn't use to judge a whiskey before tasting it.
No.
And going back to the blind tasting thing, even if you don't have like a blind tasting setup when you're trying something new for the first time, I always encourage to taste it blind without knowing the age, the proof. Just to taste the whiskey for what it is and form your opinion that way.
Yeah. So speaking of blind tastings, the whiskey that I'm drinking tonight is from Union Horse Distilling. It's their Reunion Straight Rye whiskey. And Jake poured this when we had a blind tasting for my birthday. And I had seen this bottle on the barrel in the bar, which was a single barrel pick was it from 2022?
I think it was earlier. It was like 2021.
2021.
Or 2020, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I had probably looked at it a dozen times just going to the different master classes and tasting events, but probably never would have picked it up because it's a whiskey from Kansas, and that's not something that most people have ever heard of before. But I think almost everybody voted for this bottle over what it was paired against. It sold.
It was paired against like a Smoke Wagon barrel proof malted rye.
Oh yeah, because I was the only one that picked the malted rye.
Yeah, you picked the Smoke Wagon, but they were pretty different.
Yeah. Well, the Smoke Wagon's MVP.
It's not uncommon for you to be on the wrong side of the pick. Let's be honest. You're normally like, if there's 3 votes for something, Jake is one of the 3.
Yeah.
But like I bought a bottle of this because I liked it.
I mean, it's good. We just had a whiskey club do a blind tasting with us a couple weeks ago, and they taste everything blind and they give it a rating before they know what it is. And we had E.H. Taylor single barrel in there, Fox Note Double Oak, a bunch of heavy hitters, and the Reunion Rye was the best, highest rated one.
Yeah, I mean it's an excellent whiskey. I think it's just about 5 years.
Yeah, it's like right around 5 year. I think it's slightly under, but it's 125 proof, 100% rye, $60 on the shelf.
Yeah, it's and like I wouldn't have ever picked it up unless I had it blind. So again, reiterating that message that like just try stuff because you never know if it's going to be good unless you try it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did. We like one of our first episodes we ever did a long time ago was with Very Old Barton, which the 100 proof. I was doing some research. Originally, a long time ago, had a 6-year statement on it, and then they put it down to a 4-year bib, and now it's about a 3-year. And it's not. Everyone started to do the run on Very Old Barton too, so it's not like it's something super easy to find. But I don't usually see the 100 proof anymore. I usually see the 90 a lot in stores when I see it.
Oh, the 100's the only thing I see anymore.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's what bottom shelf Warrior, $25, 3 years. It's very, very much like banana bread. For me, like it's. Are you getting the oak flavor that some people think they need to have? No, but the banana bread is very wonderful and pleasing. And this is one that I use as a daily drinker. And I mean, it's a $25 bottle that tastes great, and people pass on it because doesn't have an age statement on it. And they know it's young, but this is a perfect example of a nightly drinker that you don't need to care about an age statement for. Like, yeah, do we all have things that are pretty damn old? Yes. Are they higher up on a lot of our shelves? Yes. But at the same point, I drink this way more often than I drink those other ones. Like this is something that I crack quite often. So that's my little pitch, but some people just, like I said, block it off because it's not old whiskey, but it's a damn good whiskey especially for the price. And the other thing is these older whiskeys, they get expensive quick because you lose so much year over year. They sit and take up floor space year over year. So you're gonna the more older whiskeys are more expensive. So to find a $25 whiskey that tastes great, regardless of age statement, it's something I like to go with.
Yeah. What do you have tonight, Jake?
So I got a few different things. I've got a Maker's Private Select, and then I also have like a Bacta Spirit Specialty bottle. The reason why I picked this, so it's got some older stuff in there. There's 1994 and 1991 Armagnac in this bottle, but over 70% is 3-year rye whiskey. And so the part of this challenge to create this blend was you had to use 3-year rye and then pick other Armagnac vintages to blend in there. And they chose 3-year rye because they said when they used older rye, it just kind of ruined the flavor. It wasn't as vibrant. It was a little dead. I think it was a good example why there's a lot of young, fruitier characteristics that help layer in an older spirit that might be lacking some of that life.
Yeah, and that's actually a point that I found a lot and have heard like echoed a lot, is that a lot of people prefer their ryes younger in like the 2 to 3 year range, because as ryes get older, a lot more of the spice comes out, which some people are like Dan are not fans of. And they like those more like floral kind of notes that you get on like the younger ryes.
Yeah, so shout out to Hard Truth because I mean their rye's 2 years and one of the best, most flavorful ryes that I've tasted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
that's a good example why age doesn't really matter.
I think that was my whiskey of the year last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not you. I don't pay attention to half the shit you say, anyways.
Yeah. And so my other bottle is Maker's Mark. Most of us know that Maker's is like a 4.5 year to 7 year blend, and I've heard a few people ask like, why doesn't Maker's come out with like a 10 year or a 12 year? And I've heard my Maker's rep answer this question, and he was flat out just like, it's not good. Once it gets to that older age, it's just too oaky, loses all of its vibrant flavors, and just turns in a way that we don't want our whiskey to taste. So there's for sure a point in time
with a wheat,
with every whiskey
like
where it just kind of falls off. Yeah.
You know, like the wheat can't really stand up to that heavy oak flavor, you know, because like they're typically very soft whiskeys. It's like you do have to be careful if you're going to age it. Dan's going to give me some nerdy ass.
Dan.
But
it's so diluted. It's so diluted with water. It masks all those. Weller 12 is not good, Dan.
Oh, it's one of Jake's favorites. It holds up to aging.
If you're a Scotch drinker, Weller 12 is good. It's a good non-peated Scotch, but I don't know about a good bourbon.
No, I mean, even I was reading an article last week. Breaking Bourbon did their review of Jack 12, and it was rated like a lot of the normal stuff you see down at 3.5 stars. And people were, haven't had Jack 10 yet, and Jack 12 like and what you would expect to be a pretty bad review. Yeah, I mean, everyone's expecting it to be this. It's hard to find. It's 12 years old. It's got to be good, and it review from at least from Breaking Bourbon fell flat. But it's, you know, I agree with them on a lot of things.
Is another example.
Yeah,
I think the 12 year is better than the 15, and also better than the 18.
I've never tried the 18. The 15 is good, but I keep a knob 12 at all times. Like, it's pretty decent for the price for $65 for a 12 year. I think that's a pretty good whiskey. But yeah, but at the same point, like, how many Knob Creek 9-year barrel picks have you guys done that I would drink over my 12 year? Quite a few.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we did our Knob Creek pick episode, I think we ended up picking the youngest one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it all just comes down to the actual flavor profile. Like I actually, when Gold Eagle got the Jack 10 and Jack 12, I tried both of them side by side, and actually did not like the 12 at all. The 10 was really good. I actually passed on a bottle of the 12 because I was like, I'm not going to drink that.
And it's always interesting to try and figure out why, like I'm sorry, Jack Daniels never did older age statement stuff for a long time. They've been doing it more recently.
Mm-hmm.
Is some of that? I don't think Jack Daniels is doing this. I'm sure there's some smaller distilleries that might be doing things like this. Of you keep trying the whiskey every year in the barrel and you don't like it, so you're like, maybe we should just let it sit a little bit longer. Maybe we should just let it sit a little bit longer, and then maybe you just get to the point where you're like, well, let's just throw a big age statement on it and push it out. People are going to buy it because it's old.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's more of they knew in the past that their older whiskey wasn't as good because every distillery of that size probably let stuff age and let stuff go just to see what it can become, and they probably taste it and like, yeah, this isn't really as good as our 7-year blends that we've created, so we're just going to keep doing that. But then they kind of saw like there's a premium market now for these super age statements, and decided to take advantage of that. But yeah, I don't know. I would think it's almost like, kind of the opposite. And they're just doing it because they know there's a market for it, and they can charge more.
And I mean, going back to, on the distiller side of things, sorry, it's the longer you let stuff age, like I said, the farther you get away from your spirit, which is what we work so hard to create. And eventually you get to the point where you lose all your good flavor that you work so hard to extract, and now all you taste is barrel. And I think a lot of distillers prefer stuff on the younger side because of that. You're not, and that,
I know
and
most distillers do.
Yeah. And on top of that, what you can do is the longer it sits in the barrel, the more oak notes it gets. So maybe if you have a bad whiskey, it'll get a little bit better if you leave it sit longer too, because it might not have been the best spirit. So you got to let it sit. I'm sure there's people out there that do that because you can mask some more of some of the off flavors if you have anything in there that you're not happy with. And it takes balls to be like Buffalo Trace a couple years ago and dump their Stag Senior because they didn't like it.
Well, who said they dumped it?
That the report was that they just dumped it.
Really?
Yeah.
Down the drain?
That's what I had read. So,
we put it in ancient age bottles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought they just said they weren't releasing it, and maybe they just let it go a year longer to blend it in again.
Maybe I read something wrong, but I thought it said they got rid of it and took it as a loss. There's been stuff where we've made and it didn't have quite the right smell. And we don't do massive batches like they do, but we're like, this isn't good enough to go into a barrel. So we just take it as a loss. But
yeah, to your point, like Whiskey Acres is actually a pretty good example because they've built this flavor profile that's very corn forward on purpose to accentuate, the farm to bottle distilling philosophy or whatever. I'm not the marketing guy for them.
I think it's a gimmick. Didn't we say it was a gimmick?
They're focusing on the different corn strains, so I think it's cooler to have a younger whiskey so you can actually taste the difference in the flavor.
Can we call them varieties and not strains? That's really bothering me.
Varieties.
Thank you. All right.
But
is that what you guys call them?
That's not what we call them. That's what they're called.
Sorry to hurt your feelings, Dan.
Corn varietals.
My point was that, if you let one of those distillates age for 10, 12 years and you completely lose that corn note, it's almost like you're, tossing away your distilling philosophy or whatever, if you want to get all principles.
It's what we're trying to do is obviously with being a farm and raising everything there, we want that, but we want that to be the right flavor. And like Jake, in your post about the Whiskey Acres taking down Booker's, is that every year it tastes a little bit different. And that's because we've been experimenting for years and years and years of finding that balance of where do we have enough of that note where it's not overpowering and coming through, but you can still have a little more of that craft flavor to it. So it continues to change, but it continues to get better. I mean, we still always want to make sure that the grain is showcased. But as we see more and more of their barrel picks that are coming out, it's not as prevalent as what it was before. It's still there. But again, like the 7-year, you get a little bit of it right on the tongue, and then the rest of it's more of a, just said, again, I think I'll have stuff in time. And if Rob can't make it on the show, then we'll just do it without, but I should be able to get you guys some samples. And I think it's going to be pretty shocking to you guys what it's tasting like.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, high rye Bloody Butcher too.
Pick. The Gold Eagle pick.
No, I believe that was the a whiskey club did that one. It was a small barrel. It was a 25 gallon. That was gone before I started working there, boys. Like I can't go back in time yet. We're working hard.
Oh man.
But no, I mean but that's what everyone's trying to do, is trying to find that right. That's why a lot of these places are constantly do the same blends of around a 4 or 5 year or around a 6 year. Is that's where they know after that they start losing the flavors they want to the barrel. And some of these companies that are doing 3 or 4 or 5 year whiskeys are just, this is where we want the flavor profile to be. And it's really dang good. But if you're just looking for an age statement on a bottle to be over a certain number, you're missing a big section of the shelf that tastes just as good, if not better, than a lot of stuff that you think you need.
Yeah. All right.
But at the same time, I have my Elijah 18 right here. Put
that away, because that bottle is trash. That's like worse than Weller Special Reserve. At least Weller's under $100. No, I was gonna say shout out to like Barrel Craft 2 is a good example, because they put out a lot of $80 blends that have 5 year right on the front of the label. And people that know bourbon, know Barrel Craft puts out good products, but occasionally we get someone in the aisle that's like, oh, well, why am I going to pay $80 for a 5 year? But we all know that there's, 5, probably 8, 10, 12, maybe even some 15 year in that bottle. So yeah, I
think people don't realize that the age statement is legally only has to be the minimum age used.
It has to be the minimum.
Yeah.
So
you can't say like, you have to clearly state the minimum age in the blend.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't put 1% of a 20 year in there and call it a 20 year.
Right. It's not like rum. Rum, you can do that, but
yeah, that's because pirates can't do math.
Or can't write rules. I don't know.
They had rules, but I don't think any of them make sense. Like everything I know about pirates is from Johnny Depp, and that's not saying much. So,
But I do agree with that. I do think you should have to put the youngest in the blend. But yeah, that again doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad whiskey if it has a young age statement. Yeah, that's kind of the moral of the story, moral of the podcast.
All right. Any other words of wisdom?
None of us are very wise, so that would
taste blind.
Yeah, taste blind.
Go to taste blind or taste with an open mind. Like if someone tells you that, hey, this 3-year-old bourbon, if someone that you know drinks a lot of whiskey and they say, hey, this is a really good whiskey and it's 3 years old, you should get this. Maybe you should listen to some advice sometimes.
Yeah.
Or just taste it. Just taste it and form your opinion. Don't just assume that you're not going to like it because it doesn't have a super age statement. Just try it.
Don't be a tater.
Try it with an open mind.
Don't chase age statements. All right.
Sounds good. Speaking of age statements, Jake, how's Gold Eagle doing? Where can we find it? I had no transition, so we're just grabbing at straws here.
GoldEagleWine.com, Facebook and Instagram. Gold Eagle Wine on Instagram. Gold Eagle Spirits on Facebook. See all of our current and latest and greatest releases.
And you've got a few
Buy our Whiskey
non-
Acres pick.
yeah, there's a few
Yeah, if you
non-bourbon
want-
events coming up, right?
We do,
Those
yeah.
that
We've
are
got a
interested.
couple of agave events, a single malt event coming up. So yeah, I mean, they're all the events that we have coming up are some of the best, and I'm very excited for them. Sometimes the off bourbon events give the best presentation and experience. So if you want to expand your palate and try something new, then check out our events section.
Yeah, all the ones I've
Awesome.
been to have been fantastic, and I had to be sold on a couple of them, but they were all
But no
excellent,
regrets.
so, yeah, no
Mhm.
regrets.
And Jake, for us, socials, podcasts, you can do all that stuff. I'm done.
Yeah, at Bourbon Matters on Instagram and Facebook. On YouTube, you search for Bourbon Matters. You can also watch us on Spotify or listen to us on any podcast platform.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to go break open some older stuff now.
Did we stop the recording?
No, not
No.
yet. It'll stay. How long have you been doing this? I think by now you'd be able to see when the stop button comes
I
up.
was kidding. It was a joke.
God.
Come
Sure.
on, Dan.
Sure, Jake.
I hope you're joking.
Sure.
But
All
yeah,
right,
I
guys.
think our schedule coming up is going to be pretty cool. So keep an eye out for the next few weeks because I think we have some cool stuff planned.
We're stepping it up.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Taking it to another level.
Mm-hmm.
Cheers.
All right, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.